The revolution you can hold in your hands. Imagine holding a tiny vial of saliva in your hands and knowing, with scientific certainty, that your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather walked across the frozen Beringia land bridge 15,000 years ago, chasing herds of woolly mammoth. Or that your ancestors survived the Mongol invasions of Central Asia, traveling Silk Roads that no Western maps documented, or that your bloodline carries the genetic stamp of ancient mariners who sailed across the Indian Ocean when Europe was still locked in ice ages. This isn't science fiction anymore. This is 2028. This is real. This is happening right now. The year 2028 marks a watershed moment in human history, not because of political events or technological breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, but because for the first time ever, billions of ordinary people can access the secrets hidden in their own DNA. A saliva sample, a lab test, a few weeks of waiting. Then, boom, your entire ancestral narrative unfolds before your eyes like an ancient map suddenly becoming visible under ultraviolet light. Welcome to the era when your DNA became your personal historian. From mystery to certainty, the DNA revolution explained. Let's rewind to understand how we got here. Just 30 years ago, in the 1990s, genetic ancestry testing was the exclusive domain of academic researchers with fancy lab coats and grant funding. It was exotic, expensive, and frankly, kind of unreliable. Then came the 2000s. The Human Genome Project wrapped up, suddenly flooding the scientific world with genetic data. Researchers started mapping where genetic variations appeared across different populations. A scientist named Spencer Wells launched the Genographic Project, turning the study of human migration into something almost adventurous, tracing the epic exodus of humans out of Africa across every continent on Earth. But here's the thing, those early tests were like looking at the world through a keyhole. Mitochondrial DNA testing could trace your mother's line, going back thousands of years. Y chromosome testing did the same for fathers. But what about everyone else in your family tree? What about the intricate tapestry of heritage that comes from all your ancestors, not just your maternal grandmother or paternal grandfather? Enter the 2010s and 2020s, the era of whole genome sequencing and autosomal DNA analysis. Suddenly, scientists could examine DNA across all 23 chromosomes. Simultaneously, not just the scraps and remnants of ancient maternal and paternal lineages, they could detect genetic admixture, evidence that your ancestors had mingled with other populations. They could identify rare genetic variants that pointed to specific ancestral populations. They could build algorithms so sophisticated that your genetic code could be compared against reference databases containing the DNA of millions of people worldwide. By 2028, the technology had reached a level of sophistication that would have seemed like pure magic just a decade earlier. What you actually get, your personal ancestral odyssey. When you submit your DNA in 2028, you're not getting a simple pie chart saying 50% Irish, 30% Italian, 20% unknown. That's child's play. That's what your great uncle probably did back in 2015 and thought was cutting edge. No, in 2028, you get something infinitely richer and more thrilling. The ancestral map. Your results come back with a detailed, color-coded map showing where your ancestors were located during different time periods, not just East Asia, but 14% from the Yangtze River Valley during the Bronze Age, around 1500 BCE, when your ancestors were among the first to cultivate rice in organized agricultural settlements, or 8% from Mongolic populations of the Eurasian steppes, roughly 1200-1400 CE, when your ancestors were riding horses across vast grasslands, possibly even involved in the expansions initiated by Genghis Khan. The specificity is staggering. The precision is almost spiritual. Migration timing. Your report includes when your ancestors moved from place to place. Genetic mutations spread in waves across populations. Researchers have mapped these waves with remarkable accuracy. So when you see 11% ancestry from sub-Saharan Africa with migration to North Africa dated 300-500 years ago, that's not a guess. That's based on the documented spread of specific genetic markers during that historical period. Ancient DNA connections. Here's where it gets genuinely weird and wonderful. Many people carry genetic traces of ancient, sophisticated Bronze Age culture that rivaled ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia in complexity, or from ancient Egyptian populations, or from the mysterious sea peoples who roamed the Mediterranean 3,000 years ago, their origins still debated by historians. Neanderthal and Denisovan heritage. This might be the coolest part. If you're not of purely African descent, you carry Neanderthal DNA. Between 1 to 4% of your genome comes from an entirely different human species that went extinct 40,000 years ago. Your ancestors interbred with these creatures during the Paleolithic era, not just once, but probably multiple times over thousands of years. The report tells you which chromosomes carry these ancient markers and what genes you inherited from our extinct cousins. Some people carry variations in the FOXP2 gene, a gene crucial for language, that came from Neanderthals. Think about that. You literally carry genetic code from a species that disappeared 40,000 years before civilization, agriculture, or written language existed. Rare genetic variants. Your report might reveal you carry extremely rare alleles, genetic variants found in maybe 0.01% of the global population. These rare variants often indicate your ancestors were part of particularly isolated populations, cut off from other humans for centuries or millennia. Maybe your ancestors lived in a remote mountain valley in the Caucasus, or on an isolated island in Southeast Asia, breeding amongst themselves until genetic drift created unique variants found nowhere else on Earth. The science that makes it all possible. The technology behind this revelatory power is genuinely awe-inspiring. Long-read sequencing allows scientists to read genetic sequences that are thousands of base pairs long. Imagine being able to read entire sentences of a genetic text at once, rather than just individual letters. This reveals structural variations, chromosomal rearrangements, and complex genetic architectures that would be invisible with shorter reads. Ancient DNA extraction and analysis has become so refined that scientists can recover genetic information from bone fragments, teeth, and hair thousands of years old. There's something profoundly moving about this. A person dead for 5,000 years, their skeleton crumbled to dust, yet their DNA somehow preserved in the mineral matrix of their bones, waiting in museum drawers for scientists to finally read their genetic message. By 2028, geneticists had sequenced DNA from over 100,000 ancient individuals, a comprehensive genetic archive of human prehistory. Machine learning algorithms trained on millions of genetic variants can now identify patterns invisible to the human eye. These algorithms can process your genetic data and compare it against reference populations, identifying the most likely ancestral populations and migration routes that would explain your unique genetic signature. Massive international databases containing genetic information from billions of people. Direct-to-consumer testing companies have accumulated the largest genetic databases in human history. Academic institutions share ancient DNA. Biobanks contribute to population-based genetic data. By 2028, these combined databases represent genetic information from diverse populations across every continent, creating a comprehensive genetic map of humanity. The epic stories. DNA reveals. Here's where the real magic happens. When the data transforms into narratives, when numbers become stories of human courage, endurance, and wanderlust. The Great African Exodus. About 70,000 years ago, a small population of humans, maybe just a few thousand individuals, left Africa and began the conquest of the world. Your DNA contains the echoes of this journey. You carry genetic markers from the populations that first reached the Arabian Peninsula, then spread across the coasts of Southeast Asia. Some of your ancestors probably arrived in Australia 65,000 years ago, becoming the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians. Others ventured northward into what is now the Middle East, then fanned out into Europe, Central Asia, and eventually everywhere else. The evidence for this is written in your genes. The longer humans spent isolated in different regions, the more genetic drift accumulated, random changes in gene frequencies that happen when populations are separated. By mapping this genetic drift, scientists can reconstruct the branching tree of human migration, the conquest of the Americas. This is where DNA gets genuinely controversial. Traditional theory said people arrived in the Americas roughly 13,000 years ago via a land bridge called Beringia that connected Asia to Alaska. But DNA tells a more complex story. Yes, East Asian genetic ancestry dominates Native American populations, but some Native American populations carry genetic signatures that suggest admixture with West Eurasian populations. Some researchers even found hints of Pacific ancestry in certain South American populations. This doesn't mean Europeans sailed to the Americas in 1492 and immediately had children with Native Americans, though they did. Rather, it suggests that the settlement Middle East to Europe. Well, ancient DNA from Silk Road cities reveals something wonderful. These weren't just trade routes for goods, they were genetic bridges. People from Silk Road cities shows individual genomes that are mosaics of East Asian, Central Asian, Persian, and sometimes European ancestry. Your ancestors might have been part of this incredible cross-cultural mixing. You might carry genetic traces of a Silk Road merchant who fell in love with someone from a completely different ethnic background more than 500 years ago. Agricultural revolutions left genetic fingerprints. When agriculture spread from the Fertile Crescent, around 10,000 years ago, it didn't spread as an abstract idea. It spread because populations of farmers, people genetically distinct from local hunter-gatherers, occurred. Farmers and hunters mingled, and eventually their descendants became indistinguishable. Your genetic ancestry reflects whether your ancestors were farmers or hunters, and when the mixing occurred that blended these populations together. The personal impact, when DNA becomes destiny. For Ashkenazi Jews, many of whom lost family members in the Holocaust and had incomplete knowledge of their family's origins, DNA testing provided a tangible. For adoptees, DNA testing became a way to answer the fundamental question, where do I come from? Many adoptees found biological relatives through DNA matching. They discovered siblings they didn't know existed. They reunited with biological parents and extended family members. But DNA also revealed uncomfortable truths. Non-paternity events became visible when DNA showed a child's genetic father wasn't the man listed on the birth certificate. Encounters? Did hybrid offspring successfully integrate into human populations? Or were they isolated and eventually absorbed? Denisovans. These extinct humans are even more mysterious. We know them only through DNA. No complete skeletons, no clear fossil remains. We know Melanesians, Australians, and some East Asians carry significant Denisovan DNA. But Denisovans remain ghosts in the genetic machine, their origins and migrations still shrouded in mystery. Ancient population bottlenecks? DNA clearly shows that some populations experienced catastrophic reductions in size. Genetic bottlenecks where populations crashed from potentially thousands to just dozens or hundreds. The causes? Still speculative. Climate change, disease, volcanic eruptions, warfare? Probably a combination of factors we're still trying to untangle. The deep mysteries. DNA can trace ancestry back to the origins of modern humans in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago. But what? Genetic determinism. There's a risk of reducing human identity to genetic percentages, as if DNA alone determines who. Access inequality. The benefits of ancestry. DNA testing are disproportionately available to wealthy people in developed nations. Genetic databases are skewed toward European and East Asian ancestry. People of African, South Asian, and indigenous descent get less precise ancestry estimates because reference databases are incomplete. What comes next? Beyond 2028. The trajectory is clear. The technology will only get better. AI-enhanced genealogy. Machine learning models will become even more sophisticated at identifying patterns in genetic data. Relationship detection will become more precise. Ancestry estimation will reach new levels of granularity. Paleogenomics revolution. As techniques for extracting DNA from ancient specimens improve, scientists will sequence DNA from older and older human specimens. We might recover DNA from human ancestors 1 million years old. Imagine reconstructing the genetic history not just of modern humans, but of all our evolutionary ancestors. Epigenetic understanding. Emerging research into epigenetics, chemical modifications to DNA that influence gene expression without changing the genetic code, might reveal how ancestral environmental conditions shaped the biology of descendants. Integrated narratives, combining genetic data with archaeological evidence, linguistic analysis, historical records, and paleoclimate. Data will create increasingly rich, multidimensional pictures of how our ancestors lived and moved. Personalized medicine. Understanding ancestral genetic variation will increasingly inform personalized medical treatment. Your ancestry will help doctors predict your disease risks and prescribe treatments tailored to your genetic background. The profound meaning. Here's what I find most moving about all this. DNA ancestry reveals that modern humans are the products of countless migrations, encounters, adaptations, and interminglings. Our genetic code is a record of our ancestors' courage in facing unknown lands, their resilience in adapting to hostile environments, their capacity for interbreeding and cultural exchange with other human populations, even other human species. "300,000 years. It records ice ages and monsoons, the rise and fall of civilizations, the mixing of populations across continents and oceans. You are not separate from history. You are history, written in the language of genes, decoded for the first time by a technological civilization advanced enough to read that ancient text." Conclusion. The ultimate mirror. Remarkable. You are the proof that humans can survive anything, adapt to anything, and ultimately find connection with anyone. The year 2028 marks the moment when we finally learn to read that message. Your ancestors' journeys are written in your blood. They're waiting to be discovered. They're calling to you from across the millennia, telling their stories through the language of your genes. Listen, discover, remember, you are the continuation of their epic odyssey.